Buddha's emptiness teaching explained like never before. Have you ever wondered why some people live in peace, even in the midst of chaos, while others drown in stress, fear, and constant suffering? Why do a few rare individuals walk through life as if nothing can shake them, while the rest of us seem to carry invisible burdens we can't explain? Here's a surprising truth. It's not because they were born lucky or had easier lives. It's because they discovered something most people never even think to look for, the truth of emptiness. And once they realized this truth, everything changed: how they see pain, how they relate to others, even how they understand themselves. In today's video, you and I will take a deep dive into one of the most powerful and liberating teachings in all of Zen Buddhism, Tan Kong, or emptiness. We'll uncover how this ancient wisdom can dissolve suffering, bring clarity to your mind, and help you live with unshakable peace, right here, right now. So stay with me till the end, because what you're about to learn isn't just a philosophy. It could be the very key to your freedom. Far from being a philosophy of despair, emptiness is the architecture of liberation. It is not a negation of existence, but the profound unveiling of how things truly are beneath the illusions we so easily take as reality. The 2nd century Buddhist philosopher Nagarjuna, in his Mulamadhyamakarika, famously wrote, "Emptiness wrongly grasped is like picking up a poisonous snake by the wrong end." What he meant is this: if you believe emptiness means nothing exists, you fall into a trap more dangerous than ignorance itself. You embrace nihilism, a view the Buddha explicitly rejected. But if you understand emptiness as the absence of fixed essence, then you're no longer bound by rigid concepts. You're free. To bring this into sharper clarity, consider this: imagine standing in front of a mirror made of water. What you see is a reflection. It appears real, but it has no substance. Yet, you do not deny the image, nor do you grasp it. You recognize it as a dependent appearance, real enough to see, empty enough to flow. That's how reality works through the lens of emptiness. Let's explore another example, drawn from history, the story of the samurai Miyamoto Musashi, Japan's greatest swordsman. Toward the end of his life, Musashi retired to a cave, renounced the sword, and wrote the Book of Five Rings. In it, he spoke of the void, a concept echoing emptiness. He said, "In the void is virtue, and no evil. Wisdom has existence, principle has existence, the way has existence, spirit is nothingness." What Musashi discovered after a life of duels and discipline is what the Buddha taught centuries earlier: when the ego disappears, the way becomes clear. The void isn't to be feared, it is the space in which freedom, creativity, and insight flourish. Think now of a rainbow, a brilliant display of color and form. It captivates us. But try to touch it, to possess it, and it vanishes. Does that mean the rainbow is unreal? Not at all. It is dependently real. Its beauty comes from sunlight, water droplets, angle of vision. No one factor contains it. So it is with all things. When we understand this, we no longer chase permanence in the impermanent. We no longer demand solidity from what was never solid. And with that release, comes peace. Even Western philosophy has glimpses of this truth. The German philosopher Immanuel Kant proposed that we never experience things in themselves, only phenomena shaped by our perceptions. While not the same as Shunyata, it reflects the insight that reality is not fixed and objective in the way we assume. Emptiness is not the end of meaning. It is the womb of infinite meaning. Because nothing is fixed, everything is possible. Just as a blank canvas is empty of images, it holds the potential for every masterpiece. The real tragedy isn't that things are empty, it's that we refuse to see it and suffer as a result. We demand people, possessions, and positions to behave as though they were eternal. And when they change, as they inevitably do, we collapse. But what if we embraced impermanence? What if, instead of fearing emptiness, we made peace with it? Then we become like the ocean, deep, still, holding all waves without resistance. To live without understanding emptiness is to be imprisoned by form. To live with emptiness is to become formless and free. To truly grasp emptiness, one must enter the heart of dependent origination, not as a dry philosophical formula, but as a living truth, pulsing through every breath, every heartbeat, every moment of existence. The Buddha's declaration, "He who sees dependent origination sees the Dharma, and he who sees the Dharma sees me," is not just poetic, it's revolutionary. It collapses the illusion of separation. It dismantles the ego's fortress of I, me, mine. It reveals that existence is not built from things, but from relationships. Imagine a spider web covered in morning dew, each drop glistening, connected by delicate threads. Tug one thread, and the whole web quivers. So too is our reality, each thought. Each person, each event is suspended by countless invisible threads of causes and conditions. Nothing stands alone. Consider the life of Nelson Mandela, a man shaped not merely by personal will, but by centuries of colonialism, the tension of his ancestors' struggle, the language of both oppressor and liberator, and the global gaze of humanity. Mandela did not arise in isolation, he was a product of circumstances, choices, sufferings, and hopes. His greatness was not inborn, but emerged from interbeing. This is dependent origination in motion. Even a simple cup of tea holds a universe of conditions within it, the rain clouds that fed the leaves, the hands that picked them, the fire that boiled the water. The earth that bore the clay, the lips that now sip. There is no thing called tea that exists apart from these. Without the cloud, there is no tea. Without the sun, there is no warmth, so too, there is no self independent of the world. You are not a sealed container. You are a river. Your thoughts flow from books you've read, voices you've heard, memories you carry. Your breath is borrowed from trees. Your skin bears the story of sunlight and time. Your identity is woven from the threads of the entire cosmos, and yet, most people walk through life convinced they are a fixed, separate me, as if their name, their job, their story was carved in stone. This is the great illusion. And this illusion births suffering. When we forget that all things arise through conditions, we begin to cling. We want permanence from the impermanent. We demand forever from what was only ever passing through. And when change arrives, as it always does, we resist. Mourn, despair, but what if we let go? What if we looked at the self not as a statue, but as a flame, burning, dancing, dependent on fuel, air, and space? This is where wisdom begins. In the understanding that there is no essence, only emergence. This understanding is not just for monks in mountain caves, it has been lived by the wise across cultures. The 13th century Zen master Dogen wrote, "To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be awakened by all things." This is not poetry, it is direct pointing. When you forget the idea of a separate self, the world enters your heart. You stop defending yourself and start embracing the whole. You become the wind, the tree, the laughter of a child. And what remains, not nothingness, but a spacious awareness, flexible and open, no longer trapped by the chains of identity. You don't disappear, you expand beyond borders. Even the modern sciences are beginning to echo this truth. Quantum physics tells us particles do not exist in isolation, their properties arise only in relation to observation. Neuroscience shows the brain is constantly rewiring based on stimuli and environment. Psychology reveals that identity is fluid, shifting with context, memory, and emotion. In the ancient Buddhist insight of Pratitya Samutpada, we find a harmony with these discoveries, but the Dharma goes further. It says, "See this truth deeply, and you will be free." Not just free from false views, but free from fear. Free from the desperate grip of ego. Free from the suffering born of clinging. When you see that all phenomena are dependent, you loosen your grip on expectations, on labels, on blame. You begin to dance with life, instead of wrestling it. You realize, if I am not one thing, I can become anything. If the world is not fixed, then transformation is always possible. This is not despair, it is awakening. Emptiness is not merely a philosophical curiosity, It is the very key that unlocks the door to our freedom from suffering. Imagine standing in a burning house, clutching tightly to a painting on the wall. The flames grow closer, but you refuse to let go. Why? Because you think the painting is yours. Because you believe it defines you. Because you fear what life means without it. This is the human condition. We suffer not because the world burns, but because we hold on to it while it does. Clinging is the architecture of suffering. And the blueprint behind that architecture is the illusion of solidity. We hurt because we believe things are fixed, our identity, our relationships, our worth, our roles in society. We grasp at these constructs, trying to make them permanent in a world that never ceases to move. Emptiness doesn't destroy these things, it simply reveals their true nature. They are fluid, transient, and interdependent. Think of an actor who becomes so immersed in a role, he forgets it's a performance. He begins to suffer when the script ends, when the audience leaves, when the lights go out. But once he remembers, this was a play, the tension dissolves. The actor isn't dead when the role ends, he is free. In the same way, emptiness wakes us from the performance of the ego. The 8th century Indian Buddhist master Shantideva wrote, "If there is a solution, why worry? If there is no solution, what use is worry?" This simple logic stems directly from understanding emptiness. Worry arises from the belief that outcomes are under our full control, that we can freeze time, preserve relationships, avoid loss. But once we see the world as dynamic and ungraspable, worry loses its fuel. Even the pain of grief is transformed. We mourn because we think something has truly disappeared. But if we recognize that nothing ever had a fixed form, that everything is like a wave rising and falling in the ocean, then death is no longer an end, but a return. Love doesn't vanish, it simply changes shape. Look to Japanese Zen tradition, where the concept of mono no aware, the gentle, melancholic awareness of impermanence, teaches that the beauty of life lies in its fleetingness. Cherry blossoms are precious not despite their transience, but because of it. And when we see through the lens of emptiness, we too begin to live with such tenderness, appreciating without grasping, loving without fearing loss. Even the Buddha's own journey shows this truth. When Siddhartha Gautama left his palace, he did so not out of despair, but out of a deeper insight, that attachment to worldly forms brings inevitable dissatisfaction. By abandoning the pursuit of permanence, he discovered a joy untouched by circumstance, and this joy is not apathy. It is clarity. Emptiness does not make life meaningless, it makes it luminous. Like a clear sky with no clouds, it allows the light of wisdom to shine. Like an empty bowl, it is ready to be filled with fresh insight, again and again. This is why emptiness heals. It teaches us that we do not have to be defined by our pain. The trauma you carry, the heartbreak you endured, the shame you buried, none of it has a permanent seat within you. They too are empty. They too are impermanent. They too can pass. Once you realize this, your entire relationship with suffering changes. You no longer ask, "How do I fix my life?" Instead, you begin to ask, "What can I release?" And that simple shift, from acquisition to relinquishment, is the beginning of peace. You become like a mirror, reflecting the world without clinging to any image. You become like the wind, free to move, yet never caught. You become like the sky, vast, open, untouched by the clouds that pass through it. In understanding emptiness, we do not lose ourselves, we shed the false selves we've mistaken for truth. We do not erase meaning, we free meaning from the cage of permanence. We do not escape the world, we finally see it as it is, a dance, a dream, a marvel, and a moment, and in that realization, the weight drops. The heart opens. The suffering stops trying to define us, it simply moves on. When you begin to live with the realization of emptiness, life transforms, not by changing its outer appearance, but by revealing its hidden softness beneath the hard shell of illusion. You begin to experience the world not as a battlefield to conquer, but as a wave to ride, fleeting, vibrant, and astonishing in its transience. let's say you're walking down the street and someone insults you. Normally, your mind would flare up, defending, retaliating, wounded. But now, with insight into emptiness, something curious happens. You pause. You notice the insult arise like a gust of wind. But you are no longer a stone wall resisting it, you are space itself. The words pass through you. Not because you are numb, but because there is no solid you to hit. The ego is no longer a fortress. It is a mirage dissolving under the light of awareness. In daily interactions, this shift is subtle but seismic. Imagine you're in a heated argument with your partner. The old habit is to assert your position as absolute, I'm right. You're wrong. But from emptiness, you realize, your view is not a truth, it's a temporary construction, born from your past, your mood, your biology. So is theirs. Suddenly, instead of clashing, you become curious. You listen, not to win, but to understand. The relationship deepens, because you are no longer imprisoned by identity. Emptiness is not detachment, it is unentangled presence. You can still love, laugh, cry, dance, but without the burden of needing to possess, protect, or control. Like holding water in your hand, you stop grasping so tightly that you lose it. You let things flow, and by doing so, they stay longer. Take the example of the Zen master Ikkyu Sojin, a brilliant, eccentric monk of 15th century Japan. Once, when asked what the essence of Zen was, he simply drew a circle. No words, no explanation. Just a space that contains all, defines nothing, and excludes no one. That circle is your life, when lived from emptiness, inclusive, open, fluid, always returning to stillness. Even your work changes. Deadlines no longer define your worth. Success is not a fixed pedestal, and failure is no longer fatal. You begin to act not for egoic gain but from the joy of contribution. You serve, not to be praised, but because service itself is freedom. This is why the Bodhisattvas, those who awaken yet stay behind to help others, live from emptiness, because their compassion no longer has strings. Consider His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, exiled from his homeland, living as a refugee for decades. He has lost a nation, yet radiates peace. Why? Because he no longer clings to what once defined him, title, power, place. His smile isn't naive. It is the smile of someone who knows that nothing belongs to us permanently, and that, paradoxically, makes everything more precious. Even the mundane becomes sacred. Washing dishes becomes an act of mindfulness. Walking becomes a meditation. Eating becomes a celebration of interdependence, the farmers, the soil, the rain, the sun, all participating in this moment. Nothing is isolated, nothing is taken for granted. And when suffering arises, because it still will, you greet it like an old friend. You don't resist. You don't dramatize. You see it arise, peak, and dissolve. Like a dream upon waking, you see through its fiction. Pain may visit, but it no longer defines you. The house is empty, but the heart is full. In this way, emptiness is the art of living lightly but deeply. It doesn't remove meaning, it reveals a deeper one. Not built on permanence, but on presence. Not on possession, but on participation. You become like a lotus on water, rooted in the mud, yet unstained by it. You become like a flute, empty inside, yet capable of carrying the most exquisite music. You become like a mirror, reflecting all things, holding none, and in this profound simplicity, life becomes what it always was, not a problem to solve, but a mystery to dance with. In the unlikeliest of places, laboratories, observatories, neuroimaging centers, modern science is beginning to whisper the same ancient truth that Buddhist sages have sung for millennia: there is no enduring, separate self. No fixed substance behind the appearance. What we take to be solid, permanent, and real is in fact a dance of patterns, fluid, relational, and endlessly changing, quantum physics, the crown jewel of 20th century science, has turned our notion of material reality upside down. The deeper scientists peer into matter, the more it dissolves into mystery. Subatomic particles. They're not little marbles bouncing around. They're probability clouds, waves that collapse into particles only when observed. The act of observation itself shapes reality. The so-called observer effect is not just a curiosity, it hints at an inseparability between mind and matter, between the knower and the known. This eerily parallels the Buddhist idea that the world does not exist independently of the mind that perceives it, even the concept of a thing is breaking down. According to physicist Carlo Rovelli, author of Reality is Not What It Seems, reality is not made of objects but of relations. Things do not exist independently, they exist only in relation to other things. This is nearly identical to the Buddhist doctrine of dependent origination, the idea that all phenomena arise only in dependence upon other phenomena. Remove the conditions, and the thing disappears. And then there is the body, the human machine that we imagine houses a permanent self. Neuroscience has been peeling back this illusion for decades. What does it find? Not a controller behind the curtain, but a decentralized network of processes. That self is not located in a single part of the brain. It is an emergent illusion, constructed from memory, language, social conditioning, and neural activity. In fact, studies on split-brain patients, those whose hemispheres have been surgically separated, reveal that even within one skull, there can exist two distinct centers of awareness, each with its own preferences and beliefs. So where is the unified I? Psychologists have long grappled with the fluidity of the self. Carl Jung described the ego as only the tip of a vast unconscious iceberg. William James, the father of American psychology, wrote that the self is not a single entity but a stream, a flowing multiplicity of thoughts, sensations, and identities. The Buddhist model of the five skandhas, form, sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness, mirrors this view precisely. Strip them away, and what remains? Not a ghost in the machine. Just awareness without a center. Even cognitive science is catching on. In the groundbreaking work Being No One, philosopher Thomas Metzinger argues that the self is a phenomenal model, a virtual avatar generated by the brain to navigate the world. It's not real in the way we think it is. It's useful, yes. But solid? Permanent? Not at all. Just like a rainbow, visible, beautiful, but utterly ungraspable. And what does all this mean for our lives? It means our fear of death, our clinging to identity, our obsession with status and control, are all based on a fundamental misreading of reality. If science and Buddhism agree on one thing, it is this: the world is not what it appears to be. The self is not what you think it is. This convergence isn't an accident. Nobel Prize-winning physicist Erwin Schrödinger openly studied the Upanishads and admired Buddhist thought. Niels Bohr, one of the fathers of quantum mechanics, used the yin-yang symbol on his coat of arms, embracing the paradoxical nature of existence. The bridge between science and spirituality is not superstition, it is where the mystery of being comes full circle. We live in an age where telescopes can see billions of light-years away, and microscopes can reveal the dance of atoms. But perhaps the greatest discovery is not out there, it is the realization that what we cling to as me is no more stable than a reflection in water. And in that realization lies profound liberation. To know emptiness, then, is not to reject science, it is to deepen it. To say, not only are we stardust, but we are also space between the stars. Not only are we biology, but we are also the silence in which biology speaks. As His Holiness the Dalai Lama often says, if scientific analysis were to conclusively demonstrate certain claims in Buddhism to be false, then Buddhism must accept the findings of science. And yet, again and again, it is science that finds itself echoing the whispers of the Buddha: emptiness is not a negation. It is the ultimate possibility. A universe that is not locked in identity, but flowing in interdependence. A mind that is not trapped in ego, but open like the sky. The confusion between emptiness and nihilism is not just a philosophical error, it's a tragic loss of meaning. To mistake emptiness for the cold void of nihilism is to confuse boundless sky with a black hole. Nihilism is a dead end, emptiness is a beginning. One leads to despair, the other to liberation. Nihilism whispers, there's no point, why try? It robs life of color, turning every moment into a gray blur of futility. Emptiness, on the other hand, is like sunlight filtering through a prism. It reveals that because things are not fixed, they are vibrant, ever-shifting, and full of possibility. Emptiness does not erase meaning, it uproots false meanings so true ones can flourish. Consider a block of marble. If you believe it already is something, you can't shape it. But if you understand it as potential, not yet defined, not inherently a statue, then it becomes a playground of creation. That is the heart of emptiness, because nothing has a fixed essence, everything is moldable. The path is not carved in stone, it is drawn in sand. The famous Buddhist philosopher Nagarjuna warned that to misunderstand emptiness is to see poison where there is medicine. And what a powerful medicine it is. If the self were solid, transformation would be impossible. If the world were inherently as it appears, then injustice, suffering, and ignorance would be permanent features of reality. But because all phenomena are empty of fixed identity, they are also full of potential for awakening, justice, healing. Emptiness empowers action. Because causes give rise to effects, and conditions can be shaped, we are not helpless. Each thought, each choice, each breath matters. In fact, emptiness makes compassion not only possible but necessary. If everything is interdependent, then my suffering is not separate from yours. My happiness ripples outward, just as your sorrow touches me. We do not live in isolation, we exist in a vast web of co-arising. The Dalai Lama once explained, if things truly existed the way they appeared, then compassion would be very difficult. But because they are empty of inherent nature, there is room for understanding, for patience, for love. In emptiness, we do not withdraw from the world, we embrace it more deeply. With a heart unburdened by illusion, historically, this distinction has shaped civilizations. In ancient China, during the Tang dynasty, the teachings of emptiness influenced poetry, calligraphy, and governance. A poem was not just a static product, it was a dance between ink and emptiness, between silence and sound. In Zen gardens, the space between rocks was as important as the rocks themselves. Emptiness wasn't seen as absence, it was the presence of infinite creativity. Contrast this with the existential despair of Western nihilism that arose after the wars of the 20th century, a worldview stripped of spiritual grounding, where nothing had value, and no action had meaning. Emptiness avoids that abyss. It doesn't tell you to give up, it tells you to wake up. It's like silence in music. Without silence, sound becomes noise. Without space, form cannot emerge. Emptiness is that silence, the fertile pause that gives birth to rhythm, melody, and harmony. It's not an annihilation of reality, it's the space that allows reality to unfold. So, when we say things are empty, we are not negating their existence, we are negating their false solidity. We are freeing them from imprisonment in rigid concepts. A tree is not just a tree, it is water, sunlight, soil, air, time, and the mind that perceives it. Once you see this, even the simplest thing, a flower, a breeze, a smile, becomes luminous with interconnected meaning. Emptiness doesn't tell you that nothing is real. It tells you that everything is more real than you thought, because everything is in flux, alive, dependent, radiant with the light of impermanence. Where nihilism leaves us in darkness, emptiness opens the sky. Where nihilism numbs the heart, emptiness makes it vast enough to hold the world. Practice does not lead you to emptiness, it reveals that emptiness was never apart from you. To recognize it, you must look not at reality, but through it. like peering through clear water to glimpse the depthless ocean beneath. And the key to this shift isn't theory, it's lived inquiry. Let us explore some transformative practices that open the gateway to this direct seeing. 1. Dissolving the mirage of self through direct inquiry. Begin by sitting in silence, not to still the mind, but to meet it. Close your eyes. Ask yourself, not intellectually, but with sincere curiosity, what am I? Is the self in your face? Your memories? Your name? Let each answer fall away, like peeling an onion, only to find no core. This isn't nihilism, it's liberation. The 8th century master Santideva wrote, "Just as a banana tree has no solid core, so the self has no essence. And when this is seen, not believed, but known, you become weightless." The self, once clung to like a stone, melts into sky. 2. The 10,000 things are not 10,000 things. Take an ordinary object, a teacup, a pen, a shoe. Trace its birth. Where did the material come from? Who shaped it? Who transported it, sold it, used it? You'll find an invisible web of hands, tools, intentions, and histories. This is not an abstract idea, it's the living truth. As the Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh once wrote, in this piece of paper, "I see the cloud, the rain, the logger, the sunshine." Realizing interdependence turns the mundane into miracle. You're not separate from the world, you are its breath. 3. Watching thoughts like passing birds. Sit quietly. Let thoughts come and go without clinging. Watch how a thought arises, perhaps I am tired, or I want success, and notice, did you make that thought? Where did it come from? Where does it go? Who is thinking it? With sustained observation, you'll see there is no thinker behind the thought, just thinking. No dancer, just dance. Like clouds drifting across a sky that was never theirs, thoughts reveal their emptiness and pass on. And in that space, awareness shines, vast and luminous. 4. Cultivating compassion as an expression of emptiness. The realization of emptiness is not cold, it burns with warmth. When you see others as process, not essence, as changing, struggling, impermanent, you stop judging. A harsh person becomes a hurt person. An enemy becomes a mirror. The Tibetan teacher Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche said, "When you realize the emptiness of all phenomena, the energy of compassion arises naturally." True compassion doesn't arise from superiority, it blossoms from unity. You love not because others deserve it, but because there is no true separation. 5. Practicing dream yoga in wakefulness. As you go through your day, practice seeing life as a lucid dream. Not because it is false, but because it is fluid. A harsh word echoes in a dream. A compliment, a feather on water. Joy, don't grasp. Pain, don't resist. Treat each moment as a visitor, welcome it, learn from it, let it pass. Tibetan Buddhists use the practice of dream yoga not only during sleep, but in waking life, training the mind to see through appearances, until the dreamer awakens in the dream. That's what emptiness allows, not detachment, but awakened intimacy. 6. Gaze at the moon, not the finger pointing. All scriptures, teachers, techniques, their fingers pointing to the moon. But the moon cannot be reached through words alone. To directly realize emptiness, you must look inward, quietly, fiercely, honestly. Like Bodhidharma, the first Zen patriarch, who said, "A special transmission outside the scriptures, no dependence on words and letters, direct pointing to the human mind." Don't confuse the map for the territory. Sit with reality until it reveals its fluid nature. 7. Bow to the illusion, then walk through it. Even when you know the self is empty, conditioning still runs deep. So bow to the illusion when it arises. Ah, here is pride. Here is fear, and then step through. The Zen way is not to destroy the ego, but to laugh at it, gently. You walk through the illusion not by force, but by light. As the poet Rumi said, you were born with wings. Why prefer to crawl through life? 8. Let silence teach you what words cannot. Sometimes, the most profound practice is to stop seeking. Sit beneath a tree. Let the wind speak. Let your breath be a koan. In the stillness, something deeper than understanding arises, direct knowing. It does not shout. It whispers. And in that whisper is the echo of the infinite, the heart of emptiness itself. In the end, realization is not about becoming someone new, it is about ceasing to pretend you were ever someone fixed. Like a wave recognizing it is ocean. Like a flame realizing it is light. Emptiness is not absence, it is the dance of everything. And practice is how you remember the steps. There is a Zen saying, to speak of it is to miss it. To know it is to be silent. And yet, through paradox and poetry, through silence and sudden awakening, Zen masters have tried for centuries to hint at the ineffable nature of emptiness, not as philosophy, but as living truth. Consider the story of the monk who came to Master Joshu and asked, "What is the way?" Joshu replied, "Your ordinary mind, that is the way." The monk persisted, "But should I direct myself toward it?" Joshu answered, "If you try to grasp it, you've already missed it." Emptiness is not something attained, it is what remains when all grasping ceases. When we drop the dualities, of self and other, right and wrong, gain and loss, we begin to live from a space that is vast, open, and unconditioned. It is not a concept to cling to, but a reality to trust, like the sky that never resists the storm, or the mirror that reflects but never holds. One of the most striking stories comes from the life of Bankei Yotaku, a 17th century Japanese Zen master who taught what he called the unborn mind. A samurai once approached him, expecting a grand teaching. Bankei simply said, "You were never born. The mind that was never born can never die." The warrior, used to battles and victories, was stunned into stillness. That stillness was the teaching. In another tale, the great Zen master Huangbua said to his disciples, "If you want to transcend birth and death, cease cherishing opinions. Not cease having thoughts, but cease believing they are real." Just as a mirage shimmers in the desert, thoughts and identities appear vivid, but contain no substance when examined. To see this directly is not to become detached from life, it is to fall in love with its ever-changing dance. Consider the monk who carried a heavy backpack up a mountain and asked the master, "How can I lighten my burden?" The master replied, "Who is carrying it?" The monk stopped, breathless, not from the climb, but from the realization. The burden was never on his shoulders, but in his belief of a self carrying it. Zen does not ask you to become someone else. It invites you to become nobody, and in doing so, become free. The self is not destroyed, it is seen through, like a paper lantern glowing from the fire within. The lantern may tear, the paper may burn, but the light remains untouched. That light is the heart of emptiness, radiant, formless, full of potential. Even the simplest moment contains the entire teaching. A student once asked Master Sung Sain, "Why do we practice?" The master held up a cup and said, "This is a cup." The student looked confused. "That's it?" The master nodded, "When you drink tea, just drink tea. When you walk, just walk. That's emptiness. It's not elsewhere. It's here, shining through the ordinary, waiting to be seen without the veil of the self." To encounter emptiness in daily life is to see that the wind does not choose where it blows, the river does not hold on to its banks, the bird does not worry about its song. And neither must you. Live like a cloud, formless, free, and passing. Live like a flame, bright, burning, never clinging to the wood that feeds it. In the end, as Master Dogen said, to study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be awakened by all things. And so the path loops back to where it began, not to a new place, but to a new way of seeing. Not a journey forward, but a falling inward, into the clear, boundless mystery that has always been here. That, and nothing else, is emptiness lived. Imagine waking up tomorrow with a heart unburdened, no longer tied to regrets of the past or anxieties about the future. Imagine walking through life not as someone constantly grasping, fearing, or chasing, but as someone who simply is, open, calm, present. That is the power of realizing emptiness. It's not an escape from life, it's an invitation to experience it more fully than ever before. Now is the time to stop identifying with the storm and start remembering that you are the sky. You don't need to fix everything, you only need to see clearly. So today, take one small step, sit in silence for 5 minutes. Observe your thoughts without clinging. Ask yourself gently, who is thinking this? Not to find an answer, but to feel the space behind the question. We are building a community of awakened souls, modern seekers walking the ancient path of Zen. So if this message resonates with you, like this video, subscribe to our channel Zen Buddhism Wisdom, and share in the comments how this teaching speaks to your journey. Together, let's create a ripple of awareness that transforms not just our lives, but the collective mind of this world. You are not broken. You are not lost. You are not the waves, you are the ocean. Freedom was never far away. It was always within.